Good morning, traders. This is Perry Wilkey with StartupTrading.com. It is 8:37 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. So, looking back at yesterday's session, we can see that the Russell really didn't get anything over its overnight high. It did produce the entire day above value area, and then it left a untested point of control down at 1510. Looking at the Nasdaq, you can see it spent the majority of the morning and early afternoon inside the value area. It was really just stuck inside of there until the indices, except for the Russell, broke out in that bid up in the afternoon. You can see that the ES dipped in a little bit into value for a short period of time, and the Dow never really got in there. So they both, all three of these indexes got a little bit away from value. The Nasdaq, the Dow, and the ES as we were, approaching the closing bell, but not so much on the Russell. Another thing to take away on here is I have these basically from the low or S1 up to R2, and you can see, R2, 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 and the Nasdaq barely hitting R1. Although it was hitting an all-time high and got the headlines yesterday, it was still the underperformer. So while we're looking at yesterday's action and a little bit of, we'll get to it in a second. So everything is bullish on the time frames, right? We've had a little bit of a sell-off overnight, and we'll get into that in a minute. We'll see if there's anything going with it or if it has legs, and we'll have some good levels to watch. So we have jolts at 10 a.m. today, and that is usually a non-event. And as we look at that non-event, we'll see, but just remember, it has the potential to be explosive. So everything is about jobs right now. I want to go down and look at the range. So yesterday was pretty much a middle of the range day, right? Bell to bell average is 38.5. Previous day was 38. Session 49.5. Yesterday was 48. Overnight was a little bit under, right? 36 and 28. And the first hour, 17 and 15. So pretty close there. So as we look at the comparison over the last 5 trading days and so on, we'll go up and look at these. And these are trading days, not calendar days, because we don't really care when the market's not trading because we're traders. So Russell's the outperformer, but notice the Nasdaq is the underperformer, and the ES is lagging as well. So it's the Dow and the Russell, right? Go to 10 days, the Dow and the Russell, and followed by the ES and the Nasdaq. 15 days, same thing. Russell, Dow, ES, or S&P 500, and the Nasdaq. 20 days, same thing. 60 days, the Russell is right even over this last 60 trading days now with the Nasdaq, and then you got the Dow and the S&P 500 a little bit behind. So looking at the year-to-date cash, right, it's still Nasdaq, S&P 500, Dow, and Russell. But you can see as we're closing up, and as we got into yesterday's close, right, the S&P 500 returned to unchanged on the year. So let that sink in for a minute. The Nasdaq is hitting all-time highs. The ES hit unchanged for the year. So as we hit unchanged for the year, there's just going to be, some people just want to sell this market no matter what. So as we look at the year-to-date, up 0.5% for the ES, up 13.38 for the Nasdaq, up 30 or down 3.38 for the Dow, and down almost 8% for the Russell. So before we get into today's action here, This is what I sent the people that subscribe to my daily newsletter. I sent this out to them just before 6 p.m. last night. So if we look at yesterday's distribution for the ES, right, we can see large nodes here at 3208 quarter and 3203.75. So this band that I've got highlighted in here, you know, isn't even 5 points wide. It's 4.5 points wide and had a substantial amount of volume go off. If you look at the NASDAQ, it's very similar, a 20-point range for the NASDAQ between 9,800 and 9,820. So that's an important enough to mark on the charts and watch for reactions as we go forward. So as we look at the ES overnight, 41 points. And then there are those that 4.5 point range that I was telling you about that we marked off. And you know, going back down to basically the swing high from the Friday overnight trading before we dip back down, or as you look at it, right, the swing high from Thursday AM, that's down at 31.26, which would be about 105 points down from where we topped out yesterday. So just keep that in mind that that's only going back to Thursday's morning high if we end up being 105 points off of that high. So we got some sequences we can watch to see if they're holding. Right now we have flipped around under this, right? If I zoom in a little bit more for you. So in the overnight action, right, we opened up here, we screwed around, come back up, basically a tick or so under the previous high. It was one tick under the yesterday's bell high. Come back down, went through this. If you look on smaller time frames, there was a little bit of reaction when we got down to 08 quarter the first time, and then we went through it. But now if you looked at 08 quarter is the resistance area. If we look at all the indexes, right, the Russell printed some pie in the sky last night. So basically there was trades that went off in the Russell above the bell high before futures closed, and then in the overnight session it did print up even higher than that. And then, but since then, right, as it's come back and retested the previous day's high, it's sold off as well. S4B is down at 1489.70. The Russell is more likely to get more carried away either way than anything else. It's easier to flip around, but keep in mind that the overnight low is potentially closer to the bottom of the range for the Russell, unless we get something really going than the start of something even bigger going on for today's session. Looking at the NASDAQ, as we see how it responded to that 9,800, 9,820 level that we marked off and identified last night, you can see it hasn't even got in there. It didn't even test the point of control in the overnight session, which is in that range at 98.08 half. So it's just sitting in the middle of value, right? As all these other indexes, look a little weaker overnight, right? Because the settlements were all above value area high. So as we come back down and retrace, all the news looks at and the headlines on the financial channels is how much we're down from yesterday's close. Well, to be honest with you, that doesn't mean two shits. So it's where we are to value. It's really not where we are to the change line. So it's where the majority of the trading went off, not where we are compared to where we closed. So as we look across here and we see what's going on, right, we want to see if we're getting anything going. And you can see that we can't, now that we're below that section, right, that 4.5 point section for the ES, right, we're stuck below it, where the NASDAQ has come down and tested and it's above it. So we'll see what happens there. Remember, the NASDAQ's been the leader or the laggard in the last 60 days, even though it hit all-time highs. So as we come across here, we can see below yesterday's low, below value area low, hitting yesterday's low. So we're just getting a feel for what's going on in the markets. So looking at the overnight sequences, this in the On the left side of the chart, these are from yesterday. So one thing to mention for the ES yesterday, this purple line is basically the VIX, the VIX, and where it is in the range for the day. You can see that it was up near highs as we hit the lows, right, which is fairly normal. And Jack pointed this out in the room last night that we, ended on highs when the session ended up on highs. But what I like to see for a signal that we're going to get a substantial pullback, meaning multiple days, possibly weeks or months, is that we actually had the VIX up as the market's up on highs for most of the trading session. For over 50% of the trading session is what I like to see for that signal, just not a flash up at the end. So we've got some sequences that can show us what's going on to see if we're going to get anything bigger down, but I really would be shocked if we can print anything below 3180 this week, basically. So as we come across here, we can see bears in control. So let's blow up this chart, and this is for the session, and it lines up close enough. We were one tick higher than this yesterday. We fat fingered that on the draws more than not. So as we hit this high in the overnight session, we've come down, right? We just tested the 38.2 short and come off of it. But this 3190 is a long, so I'm going to show you that on another chart here in a second. So as we come across this 61.8 here, basically at the 3190, we're stuck between the short draw from overnight and that resistance, support resistance band that we drew up that's 4.5 points wide. So as we look now at the NASDAQ, which is a little bit stronger, right, you can see coming off the highs, right, they're still holding the halfway back short. That line in the sand is 98.70.75, so we'll see if that gets breached for the NASDAQ. But coming off the lows, right, held to 61.8 and going up, and we didn't look at coming off the lows for the ES, so let's go back and do that. So it's already broken the 61.8, so it's sloppy coming out of these lows, so nothing really to write home about for that. Looking at the Russell, coming off the lows, it's holding the 61.8 long so far. And the line in the sand for the coming off the lows overnight is 1504.40, and then you can see the bears are going to lose control right now or keep it by staying under 1523.60. So looking at the ES and the draw that I'm using, basically, and Jack may have a different draw, but the sequence I'm looking at is basically from 65.5 too high. So we'll edit this. So as we look at this draw that I'm interested in, that I'm following for the up sequence to see if it stays intact, this is the first one that I'm looking at. This draw is basically at, I'm sorry, it's 64.5. My apologies. So 64.5 to high. Basically 3190 is the 61.8 of that draw. 3190 is the overnight low. So this, although we've had this nice pullback, we're in these ranges, don't get too excited unless this breaks. And then the anchor that I had before, I think, was right around 29.5. So even if we go back to 29.5 now, so as we go back to 29.5, the 50 is at the 80. So even if we break 90, you probably have about a 10-point shot down to shake some people out that won't know that that draw is there and then respond up in there. So I'm really looking for areas to participate potentially to the long side. I'll watch the internals as we open up this morning and see if anything goes on with those. But let's look at the NASDAQ now that we beat the hell out of the ES. So as we come back across here, remember, it's the one hitting all-time highs, but it's slowed its acceleration. We can definitely draw support and resistance. Remember, we have the 9800 to 9820 already on the charts, and we can add 97.44 quarter basically in there. And that's really yesterday's low. Should be a good line in the sand. Below yesterday's low, I don't think there's a whole lot of room to the downside. I mean, it is several points, but you're looking at 96, 92, 75 basically is where I think that there will be a potential floor. Looking at the Russell, and we talked about this before, that we could kind of chop around in the zone between 1433.40 and 1582.30. There's really no tremendous support or resistance, right? This is basically a void that's going to take a few days to chop around. And to be honest with you, we could, have some minor pullbacks or even come down here and test these lower levels at 1421, 1433.40, and just screw around. But we could literally spend most of the month of June between 1433 and 1582.30. And we're right around the middle of the range right now. Looking at the Dow, so the Dow was trying to hold 27,100, right? It held at 26,510 after finally breaching, these other previous levels. Now this is a support area that 27,100 breaching, you could get another almost 500 points. I'd look at 26,665 as a floor for potentially breaking that, and then watch for a shake and bake. You can see how it flirted back and forth across that line, stumbling back and forth, deciding whether it wants to be above it or below it yesterday. So looking at all the indexes and really, kind of putting a wrap on this. This 3190 is a 61.8 of the current draw. The long sequence has been strong coming out of these lows, and there's nothing to make me think that it's over or broken yet. Breaking this might only get you another 10 points down, which would be right around S2. So keep that in mind today. But watching these levels that we highlighted, this 4.5 points between 32.0375 and 32.08 quarter, right? Getting back above there and then holding the lower one, right? So once you cross over both, holding the lower one as support, and then going back and forth, you're just really traipsing through value area at that point in time, and we'll see where this goes. But the Nasdaq, right, has held that like a champ overnight, and it's unless the Nasdaq gets under 9,800, I wouldn't even really even consider hitting the short button on it, even though it has been the laggard. I hope this helps you guys. If you like this technical analysis, give it a thumbs up. I'll add some other links in tomorrow's video, and you can follow me on Twitter. I'll throw that in there as well tomorrow. So you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you then.